You want to hear the best story that somehow has not been adapted into a movie yet? Well, strap in, because I'm about to tell you about the man who famously sold the very much not for sale Eiffel Tower twice. My man Lustig may have run a ton of high-profile scams over his impressive life of crime, but let's be real, everybody wants to hear about how he pulled off the Eiffel Tower job. Where do you even come up with an idea like that? Turns out, it was not quite as insane as you would think. I mean, it's not like he just looked at the Eiffel Tower one day and was like, I don't know, what if I sold that thing? No. He actually got the idea from a newspaper article about the Eiffel Tower. Specifically, it focused on just how expensive it was to keep up with the Eiffel Tower each and every year. This led to an ingenious idea. What if the French government got tired of footing the bill? What if they decided to sell it to a private businessman who would cover the cost for notoriety's sake? Even today, that's not so outrageous. The tower, by the way, still costs the French government a fortune. It costs them about $1.1 million a year. Sure, it likely brings in a great deal of money for tourists who want to snap a picture of the famous tower, so our star of the show, Victor, got to work scheming and preparing for his biggest job ever. He started by going to one of his best forgers to get him a ton of fake government stationery and other fake documents to make him seem legit. He also did serious research into the costs of the Eiffel Tower and other concerns Parisians had raised over the years. He then arranged for an expensive meeting at one of the city's finest hotels, which probably was a sizable investment. All he needed now were some marks. Victor invited several of the richest scrap metal dealers in the city to his confidential meeting. He then put on the soft-spoken charm as he introduced himself as the Deputy Director General of the Ministry of Posts and Telegraphs. Lustig explained to them that the cost of the Eiffel Tower was too much for the government, that they were tired of footing the bill, and that the aesthetic of the modern tower clashed with the classic Gothic cathedrals. Eventually, he singled out André Poisson, an insecure businessman, as his primary target. All of the other dealers threw in their bids, but Poisson was able to top them all. He presented Victor with a shocking 70,000 francs to purchase the Eiffel Tower. After the deal was done, Lustig took his cash and then fled to Austria, sure that the police would be on his trail. No one knows for sure, but it seems as though Mr. André Poisson did not report the crime. It's likely that he was too embarrassed to admit it. Regardless, Victor Lustig was all too happy to realize no one was after him. So, within the same year, he returned to Paris and started the exact same scam. You'd never believe it, but he managed to pull it off again. Just before he scored for the second time on his Eiffel Tower scheme, though, one of his targets did catch wise enough to inform the police. This time, Lustig really did have to flee the country. That's only one of his schemes, too. It's not even the one that scammed people with fake bills, or the one he pulled on Capone. Lustig had all sorts of small cons he'd developed over his career. Most of them involved quick schemes like fooling tourists into investing in theatrical performances that, didn't exist. He made money doing sleight of hand robberies or conning banks out of bank bonds under the guise of a trustworthy businessman. Lustig's stairway to heaven was without a doubt the Rumanian Box Job. This was a steamer trunk rigged with fake gears and levers that would supposedly take in any bill of currency and then copy it identically. He would then have it authenticated by a bank to completely fool his mark. The trick here was that the box was rigged with several actual bills of real currency that would make it appear to be copied when a fresh bill was entered into it. The machine would take 6 hours to copy the bill, giving Lustig plenty of time to make his escape. The most brilliant part of this scheme was that he would refuse to sell it to anyone. They would have to offer him an obscene amount of money for him to part with his beloved invention. He actually convinced a Texas sheriff to buy the box off of him for thousands. Then, once the sheriff figured out that he'd been scammed, he chased Lustig across the country. Only Victor managed to convince the sheriff that he simply wasn't using it right, though the counterfeit bills he had to use to convince the sheriff ultimately led to his doom. But we're gonna save that little golden nugget right to the end. How do you get away with conning one of the most dangerous men alive, Al Capone? Well, according to Lustig, you do a small con instead of a big con. He convinced Capone that he had a huge Eiffel Tower-sized job that he was working on that would require tens of thousands of dollars Capone could keep in a safety deposit box. He then spent time getting to know Capone, and the two became trusted associates. After a few months, he told Capone that the job fell through, but he needed several thousand to hold him over until he put together a new job. Capone gladly gave his buddy the cash, and Lustig gladly took off with his buddy's money. How can this man be so trustworthy? Most con men do not become infamous historical figures. Lustig was constantly dressed in the trappings of a true gentleman. He was disarmingly charming, soft-spoken, and kind. Basically, he presented himself as the exact opposite of the image most people had of what a criminal looked like. If you ever wanted to be a con man, well, this is the rule book. First, be a patient listener. It is this, not talking fast, that gets a con man his coup. People expect a con artist to be a quick-talking, belligerent salesman, not a thoughtful friend, which leads right into rule number 2. Never look bored. Quietly listening isn't enough. A good con man always seems super interested in whatever his mark is talking about, no matter how boring it is. Though it's good to always remember to let the other person lead the conversation. As his third rule implies, wait for the other person to reveal any political opinions, then agree with them. This is also coupled with the next rule. Let the other person reveal religious views, then have the same ones. As a side note, this is also vital advice if you ever want to avoid an argument in the comments section. The list features a bit more risk and risque with his next rule. Hint at sex talk, but don't follow up unless the other person shows a strong interest. So, don't be James Bond out there. Just slightly move things in a seductive direction before leaping back if it is not appreciated. Unfortunately, the next 2 rules are not as romantic. Never discuss illness unless some special concern is shown, and never pry into a person's personal circumstances. They will tell you all that eventually. So basically, don't stick your nose into something personal unless the other person brings it up, which they probably will because you are patiently, seductively listening like a best friend who just so happens to have all of the same political and religious viewpoints. The last rules are much more inwardly focused. Never boast, just let your importance be quietly obvious, and never be untidy, and never get drunk. This all goes along with the gentlemanly demeanor. You need to look clean, be clear-headed and confident without the need to brag about it. Honestly, I know, this all seems pretty obvious, but you cannot argue with the man's success rate. That is until he found himself in prison, for a little while, at least. All of this crime could only last so long. As with criminals like John Dillinger, it was his girlfriend who gave him up. She caught wind that he was cheating while he was running a counterfeit scheme, the same one that he fooled that Texas cop with, and she turned him into authorities. He was arrested and thrown in jail, though that wasn't the end of it. Right before his trial, he faked an illness and constructed a makeshift rope. He leapt to his escape and was gone. Well, gone for less than a month. He was eventually caught where he pleaded guilty to all charges and was shipped off to Alcatraz and perished there due to pneumonia. Still, you gotta imagine, everyone on his cell block, they must have loved that Eiffel Tower story. On a completely different note, I'm selling the Statue of Liberty on eBay if anyone's interested. Just keep it on the DL for obvious reasons.